Week 6, running back rankings, fantasy football, half PPR, coming to your face holes right now. We've got the rankings up on the screen. We've got some gaps. We've got some matchups. We've got everything in between. We'll run through the top 40 for y'all, all right? And if at any time you just want to get the rankings, you don't want to hear us yap, head over to bdge.co. Become a big dog member. Or you could sign up on Underdog Fantasy, deposit $10, use promo code BDGE. You'll get this package free for the rest of the season. Let's run through the first 12. We got Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley at 2, Jordan Mason, Alvin Kamara, Jahmyr Gibbs, Josh Jacobs, James Conner, Bijan Robinson, Kenneth Walker, David Montgomery, James Cook, Breece Hall. Bijan, we have a large gap here. Now, Bijan's obviously wildly underperformed from a fantasy perspective this year relative to where most people drafted his ass, unfortunately. That seems to be the theme with a couple of these early picks in the top 12 here. Now, you're kind of following his production up to this point and saying, like, I don't believe that it's going to change against Carolina, although it is a paper-soft matchup. Yeah. You're saying the matchup is good enough that I feel comfortable throwing him in as a high-end RB1. Again, everyone's probably starting Bijan regardless, so I don't want to go too deep into here, but there is a relatively large disparity. So you don't have a ton of confidence that Bijan like really has his ceiling game this week?
I guess when I'm ranking it against the field right now, like watching that Thursday night game, Bijan, honestly, he looked good. There was a dead leg he put in there where he looked really good. But
he always looks good, yeah.
What I'm seeing is that the production weekly is actually going down. So it's hard for me right now with a bunch of confidence just because of a matchup to say Bijan Robinson, when Kirk Cousins, this guy can really do a good job catching the ball out of the backfield. He's a guy that has 3-down prowess. He's getting all those percentage of snaps. 500 yards in the air, and not much of it was Bijan's production. So I guess for me, I want to see it before I'm changing my ranking to him.
Yes, sir.
So this is why I'm pretty low on him, probably to consensus.
Yeah, and you hit it right on the head. For me, it's the matchup projecting that this will be kind of a get-right game for Bijan Robinson. I think part of what, at least my hypothesis is over the last couple of weeks, is he was injured going into that Thursday night game. Like, he was on the injury report.
A little bit.
Part of me wants to feel like, and maybe I just am wanting to feel that way, is that he was a little bit banged up, and that's why Tyler Algier saw 40% of the snaps. But he got a little bit of a longer rest. Like you said, on paper, this is one of those matchups where he should be able to eat. They are 31st against opposing running backs right now, giving up 30.2 fantasy points a game. I think that is a ton of points. And if they get up early, which defensively Carolina hasn't really been able to keep teams at bay, I think they could lean on the run game. And maybe that means a little bit more Tyler Algier. He's in my rankings down there as well, but Bijan Robinson should probably have a decent game.
Yeah, Carolina's super banged up on defense. We have some holes on the offensive line. I guess
that was another thing I was going to say. I don't mean to cut you off. I'm just saying
you're good.
The O-line right now is not doing a lot for Bijan as well.
Yeah, I go back and forth with this as a Falcons fan because I think our offense is like starting to really come into shape, right? And it was like brutal early on because we don't really know what to make of it, but we're kind of clicking on all cylinders. And I think from a real life perspective, I really don't hate the way that we're using Bijan and Tyler Algier because Algier's a good player in his own right. It's almost like, though, okay, if you're a Bijan owner, like, which direction would you rather the game script go in? Would you rather it be really pass happy? Are you confident that Bijan gets really involved as pass happy? Or would you rather them dominate and then you're like, wait, that's probably, Algier getting a lot of carries. So it's kind of tricky. Like, when you start to think about it and you answer it from like man, how do I feel about this? That's where like a little bit of my hesitation comes from Bijan. Now, if he ends up catching pay dirt here, he'll probably end up with 18 whatever points. But I like the way the offense is running, and it's not necessarily through Bijan right now. But the matchup's great. We are, I think, 6.5 point favorites, so like we should have a nice steady flow of touches for him.
Go ahead. I
was going to say, and just the way that the running back position has been the last couple of weeks, it hasn't been great. I mean, last week we were talking about Tank Bigsby being the number one guy on the week. So I don't know. I don't think it's going to take a lot for Bijan to end up as one of the top plays this week.
Yeah.
I could also see on the flip side where it's much like Josh Jacobs last week, where he had 20 touches, 71 yards, and had a touchdown and that got him to running back 10.
Yep.
Yeah.
Agreed.
All right, let's keep moving down. Kenneth Walker, David Montgomery, James Cook, and then Breece Hall. He's the last one I kind of want to touch on here because Breece, like with Bijan, you watch Bijan play and you're like, okay, he looks good. Like the big games are probably coming. If he ends up catching some dump offs, if he ends up getting the goal line touches, they're going to happen. If you've been watching Breece Hall play or the Jets play at all this year, it doesn't instill a lot of confidence in like what's to come for that offense. Now, a lot of people are going to talk about the solid firing, whatever. They got more problems on offense than that right now. Their offensive line has been like putrid. There's nothing creative going on there. And maybe the coaching change really helps that, but I think it's more personnel driven at this point than it is what's going on there. And I think it's a cool point for us to talk about because we're all in a league together, your Idiot League Mates, which we also have a side YouTube channel just covering that league. I just traded Breece Hall away yesterday. And the trade for you guys, it's super flex, full PPR. I got rid of Breece Hall and Jared Goff. I got Anthony Richardson and Josh Jacobs. Now, on the surface, like, it wasn't a trade that I walked away being like, I dominated that trade. I think it's a fair trade for both sides. Yeah. I'm in a really, really good division where we play 4 teams in each division. The top 2 teams in that division advance. It doesn't matter overall standings. The other 3 teams in my division are all 4-1. I got to shoot for upside. Goff is not the upside play at quarterback. Went for Richardson. And then Breece to Jacobs. If I had to pick 1 for 1, I'd probably still take Breece overall for the rest of the season. But, like, the way I approached that was I would rather attach myself to the Green Bay Packers offense than the New York Jets offense right now. So, based on that trade, you guys obviously have Jacobs higher this week. The matchup predicts that, of course.
Of course.
How did you guys feel about that trade? What do you think about like Jacobs versus Hall rest of the season? What do you think about Hall's rest of the season outlook, I should say? Because it's like one of those where you listen to any fantasy football podcast right now and they're like, oh, Breece Hall's the easiest like buy low. And I'm like, do you guys watch football? Like, do you watch any of the Jets games?
It's hard to have a lot of confidence in Breece moving forward, like watching weekly. I've been more of the mindset I've been trying to be more patient because, early on you don't want to get over your skis. But Braylon Allen, was looking better in certain games. I think last game you saw it's not Braylon Allen or Breece. This whole offense is just broken.
That's what scares me. Yeah.
And I'm really concerned that just because you move on from a guy like Saleh, who's a defensive-minded guy, that Hackett's still there, that this offense is going to look night and day different. It's just hard to believe, honestly, it's hard to understate. Last year, Breece Hall was a league winner getting the ball 20, 30 times a game and going bananas, where now Breece Hall made a 6-yard play, I believe it was, and the announcers said something like, oh, that was one of Breece Hall's better runs in the last 2 weeks. And that was so hard to hear and actually realize that.
It was the first hole that he got. We were all watching it here, the London game, and we were all like, oh, fuck, like finally got a hole. And even when that hole hit, there was like no explosion or pop to it. It was almost like he was surprised to get the hole so heavily that like he was like, oh, I'm not going to turn the burners on.
At least to me, body language is something I don't pay a ton of attention to, but his body language doesn't look great right now, honestly. It looks like he's a guy that's not getting the holes that he's looking for.
Yeah, I mean, he came out and he was like, it feels like I'm playing 1-on-11. That was like a couple weeks ago. I mean, we're 5 weeks into the season, and he started off great, but again, it wasn't like I was seeing the Bijan glimpses. It was more like he ended up getting 5 checkdowns a game. He ended up being the one on the goal line for like the 1 or 2 yard runs, and I'm like, in the games that he doesn't get it, this is what we've had the last 2 weeks. Now, I think the dump offs are still going to come. Like, I still think he'll have plenty of games where he gets 4, 5, 6 receptions. I just still worry about the run game out there in New York. And even then, like before I made the trade, I was like, I wanted to make sure I wasn't really like overlooking anything and like doing something real dumb here. And I did go back to last year where Breece was like popping off. I do still like when you look at the games from last year, and again, he was right off an ACL tear, so I don't even want to really like put too much into it. But in between a lot of those games where it was like 25, 27 points, there were a bunch of like 2-point games and like 4-point games. I'm like, maybe we just kind of like overlooked that with Breece, and he's not the player that we imagined. And if he's not in an offense that allows him to hit home runs, like what is he?
I think so. And also one thing that I think maybe was just a little bit overlooked this last offseason is when you looked at last year and how Breece was successful, obviously like he was one of the top, receiving running backs in the NFL. And a lot of that was probably because Zach Wilson is a little bit inexperienced, playing closer to the line of scrimmage, looking for the easy security blanket. Sure. And Aaron Rodgers, a very good veteran, doesn't need the security blanket. He can make the plays by himself. He's done this for 20 years. Yeah. And so he's not relying on hitting Breece Hall as often. And with that PPR upside kind of coming down a little bit, we're just seeing the ceiling of Breece Hall come down a little bit as well.
Yeah. So rest of the season, would you rather have Breece or Jacobs?
I think I would rather have Jacobs, but I've been talking about Jacobs over the last couple of weeks as a potential buy low, just because I think with Jordan Love back in this offense, now keep in mind, Jordan Love, he hasn't looked great the last 2 weeks, but I think there's definitely a lot more upside in that Packers offense than there is in the Jets offense. And so it's close for me. I think you can make an argument either way, Breece or Jacobs, but I'll take the volume of Jacobs and the upside of that offense in Green Bay.
Yep. I want Jacobs rest of the season.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
And I have not been that high on Jacobs, frankly. So I guess right now I'm soured on Breece.
Hard not to be, dude. I don't think it's overreaction because we're 5 weeks into the season. It's not 2 or 3, it's 5.
That's, I guess, for me where it's like, okay, I don't want to be overreactionary. Like in redraft, we're talking about 5 weeks of the season. Like at this point, you're not being overreactionary. You're ignoring what's happening in front of your face.
Correct.
I think the only positive that I would take away from Breece is last week, even though he wasn't necessarily used, neither was Braylon. So, he was still seeing the majority of the rushing workload. It's just obviously nothing has happened.
Yeah, to be completely clear, I don't think any of us see Breece Hall actually losing their job to Braylon Allen. No. It's just really worrisome when you watch how much better Allen looks. And it's way more of you're attached to an offense that scares the shit out of you. And what is the weekly upside of an offense? They had one good game against the Patriots. Outside of that, they've been extremely fucking clunky.
Speaking of losing your job, I know we're kind of skipping ahead here, but I feel like Tank Bigsby and Travis Etienne's about as good of a conversation to follow that as there could be one.
Yeah, I agree. We'll jump right into that second tier here. We got DeAndre Swift at 13, Chuba at 14, Tony Pollard, Brian Robinson, Ramondre Stevenson, Chase Brown. And we'll stop on Chase Brown here before we get to the Jacksonville backfield, because Chase Brown's looked a lot better than Zach Moss in recent weeks. And then Zach Moss, I don't know what his status is, because it feels like he suffered a high ankle sprain in that game when the player hip drop tackled him. He came back into the game 2 plays later, had a carry, but so did Joe Mixon after he had his high ankle sprain.
Yep.
Now the reports out of Cincy camp are that it's actually not that he avoided anything serious, and it's not as scary. Those are the same exact reports that came out of Houston's camp as well, though. Yep. So I don't really know what to make of the backfield situation. My eyes and what I've seen, that looked and felt, and from what I've gathered from actual Twitter docs that I rely on, high ankle, or at least medium severe.
Would almost be leaning towards 70-80% chance that Moss is not playing this week.
Yeah, and it sucks because they got a great matchup against New York, and now Chase Brown's probably going to take over as the workhorse here.
Correct.
Well, and my current rankings are reflective of the uncertainty that they're giving us as far as realistically what they're telling us about the injury. Zach Moss, if you watched it, he did not look like he was having a fun time. He looked like he was really in pain. And I've seen ankle sprains where it looks worse than it is. This one looked serious enough to me. I think there's a chance where I have Chase Brown right now at 16. The reality is, though, the last 2 weeks, I talk about snap share and opportunity. They don't meet the same for him. His snap share has actually not been that high. He's been 33 and 40% the last 2 weeks, but his opportunities 20 touches the last 2 weeks apiece.
Yeah, they trust him if Zach Moss is out. I think Moss is a good pass blocker, and that's why he stays onto the field and gets goal line work and catches a lot of passes. But if you consolidate that backfield to one player, you're looking at easily an RB1.
And this is a guy that at Illinois took a lot of touches, so I think he has the ability to. I think right now what I've seen from him the last 2 weeks is a guy that has upside. And against this team, honestly, if you told me Zach Moss is out, I'm putting him close to top 10.
I agree with that. I'm looking at the rankings right now, and I would play him over DeAndre Swift. I would play him over some guys up there. He's locked in because what else does Cincy have in that fucking backfield? They still have Travion Williams or some shit that's just been there hanging around.
You're going to get a heavy dose of
a bunch
Chase
of Jags. I think the thing too is, like you said, this ranking right now for me, I have him at 21. It's probably a little bit low just based on, if he does end up being the starter, obviously that's going to move up. I still have Moss ranked right now, but obviously as news changes, these will happen. I think for me, I would move him up probably into that top 15. I think of guys like, if I'm trying to decide between Chuba Hubbard versus Atlanta and Chase Brown, I think Chase Brown is a guy that I would lean that way, especially when you look at the game total here. Even though they're playing the New York Giants, and the Giants have been pretty good against the running back position so far, it is a 48.5-point game total. There's going to be a lot of points.
Offense is clicking on all fucking cylinders, too.
And over the last 2 weeks, Chase Brown with Zach Moss in the lineup has been a top 15 running back in half-point PPR leagues. Yep. So he's been a top 15 guy twice with Moss. I don't see why he wouldn't be able to do that, especially with Moss not in the lineup.
Agreed. Yeah, he's got crazy upside this week. All right, so let's keep moving down. We got J.K. Dobbins. Now, I actually kind of want to stop on J.K. Dobbins for a second because he was red hot to start the year, and then he had 2 tough matchups with a banged-up team, came back down to earth the last 2 weeks. Now they have their bye. Now they're at Denver, which is a tough defense. It's is it as easy as he's probably just going to be somewhere in between, the first 4 weeks of the season? I almost feel like Dobbins might be a buy low, as his team gets healthier again. I kind of think that I don't really want to hold a matchup against Pittsburgh against him where most running backs struggle, and I lean more towards he's a really good buy because of how much trust they've lost, it feels like, in Gus Edwards. Then he's kind of fallen off, or he's actually not as good as he was the first 2 weeks.
I would say maybe a buy low, but there's still some tough matchups over the next couple of weeks. I'm looking at the schedule. This week, obviously, Denver. Next week, Arizona. You like to see that matchup. New Orleans after that, and then Cleveland and Tennessee as the next 3. So all kind of middle of the pack, maybe a little bit closer to the top half than they are the bottom half. Maybe he's a buy low, but I think for me this week, he's still a guy that I'm just plugging in as kind of a low upside RB2. I don't think he has a lot of upside unless he finds the end zone. But I do think he can be an RB2 play here against Denver this week.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you'll find kind of the middles meeting there where you're seeing week 1 and 2, it was like, oh my gosh, this J.K. Dobbins upside is unreal. And then tough matchups the last couple. I think the thing that I'm looking for more so than anything is we're looking at the snap shares quietly going up to where the last time they played, he played 71% of the snaps, which if we're saying that J.K. Dobbins is going to be the primary operating back on all 3 downs, that there's
71% is a high fucking
There's
number.
not that many running backs that play that many snaps in an offense that's going to be run heavy.
Dude,
so that's where I think I'm leaning a little more into JK as a sneaky buy.
Yeah, I like that. You know what we need to fucking see? We need to see one game where he takes like the Eckler role, because we saw Herbert dump it off. So if JK has one game where he goes like 4 for 60 through the air, I think we're looking at him in a different light. And we're like, okay, maybe he does have that workhorse upside.
So let me ask this question, because
I get down.
it's going to lead probably into our next conversation here, but Travis Etienne or J.K. Dobbins rest of the way. Which one are you going with?
I'm gonna take Dobbins.
Travis Etienne to me is going to be a tough one to take over a lot of players at this moment. Right now, I'm very curious to see that matchup in general, but I will take JK ahead of Travis Etienne.
Fair enough.
Etienne feels like it's just not a stock that I am looking to buy into.
You think he's going to get dealt at the deadline? I've seen some rumors that he could, because he's on that last year of the contract. They didn't pick up the 5th year, or they did pick up the 5th year, right?
I think they did.
So
I think they did. That feels like a tough sell to a team that's like, we're going to get him as a – I mean, I don't know. Maybe he could be a cool fit in, like, Dallas or something like that.
I think he'd be cool in Dallas, and depending on Aaron Jones' injury in Minnesota, I wouldn't mind them going and making a move.
You're right. He could definitely fit in a couple teams. I actually haven't seen that at all. That would be a little bit spicy. I mean, that would open up basically 2 RB1s.
That would open up baby.
Tank. Yeah, it would be very interesting to see what the compensation would be for a guy like him, too. Former first-round running back that, at this point, I don't know that he's going to command a huge amount of capital.
Third gets it done easy.
I think a third's a great deal for Jacksonville at the moment.
I almost think you wouldn't even get a third for it, because any team, like, you're getting him for 1 year. And if it's more than 1 year, then you're also investing capital into him, which obviously devalues the pick that they have to give up.
It has to be a day 3.
I would assume a fourth probably gets that done for ETN.
If I'm Minnesota, I'm throwing that to them easy. I'm doing it.
Pivoting to that conversation in Jacksonville after last week, where are you guys at with Travis Etienne in this weekly matchup and then moving forward?
It feels like it feels just like Rashad and Bucky Irving, where it's like just one good week from any of those 4 makes me just feel way better about that running back
next week?
in particular. Yeah, where it's like it doesn't feel real. I mean, to be fair, though, Tank has been playing out of his fucking mind. He's like ranked number 1 in almost every metric you could find.
I've been talking about this particular thing for a little while now. Last year, Tank Bigsby underperformed like crazy, but on a per touch basis, he was actually more efficient than Etienne last year. This year, we're seeing, though, the efficiency from Tank Bigsby is crazy. And last week was all you needed to see, I think, if you were not believing or you're a naysayer that Etienne's going to cede work to him. That's all you needed to see.
It was the first week that Tank got more snaps than Etienne. The weird thing is, like, you're not really sure about the role of each guy.
That's what I'm saying. Actually, the reason I have him so close, in my heart, it's like, as a objective watcher of the game, and it's just where it's at. Obviously, this should be Tank Bigsby's job moving forward as far as the early down work. Now, the pass catching work was Etienne's actually still. He caught 6 passes last week.
Yeah.
It's not just as simplistic as that in locker rooms. And Travis Etienne's a first-round pick. He and Lawrence went to college together. I'm not sure that the favoritism is going to lean to just Tank Bigsby taking this role. That's where I'm at.
Dougie P came out and was like, Etienne's still our guy, which, like, obviously, coach speak, take it with a grain of salt. But it wasn't if he came out and he was like, nah, Tank's definitely earned more work and we want to see, like, what? Did something happen like that?
No, you were talking about coach speak, and the coach speak index put that quote on Twitter.
And he was like, he lying?
Doug Peterson has a 30% reliability rating when it comes to depth charts.
Okay.
So when he says he's our guy, Doug Peterson is not the guy to trust.
Yeah, I just never see a world where Tank actually takes like 65% of the snaps.
I don't either.
I think they got a good thing going on with the backfield.
I don't necessarily believe that it'll be a flip in any way. Like, I do think, it could get closer to where we are seeing that Rashad White and that Bucky Irving, where it's damn near 50-50. And I think just the conversation that we're having and me looking at my ranking right now, like, I already know that I need to pull Tank Bigsby up. I don't love the ranking that I have him at right there. But that being said, I just think last week when we talk about the matchup with Chicago and how these guys should perform this week, I mentioned that Chicago was being a little bit overrated, and I felt like the one spot where you could actually maybe get some points on them is in that run game. And I think Chuba Hubbard kind of showed that too.
That was a good call by you for sure.
They definitely give points to the running back. They are probably by far the best secondary in football right now.
So good, they're past.
They are so damn good, and that worries me for a guy that we'll probably talk about in the wide receiver episode, like Brian Thomas. But I think this week there's still going to be some points for some touchdowns from the running backs. Who it's going to be, damned if I know. But I think these guys should definitely be probably flex plays, RB3 plays.
I think they're both like
RB2s.
viable flex plays at this point, where I think they'll both get between 10 and 12 touches. If one of them has a breakaway play, they'll be the better play. The goal line carries is kind of like up in the air. We don't really know who's going to get them.
ETN should see more receiving work, so if you're in a full PPR, maybe you give him the edge. But overall, it's kind of messy here in Jacksonville.
Yeah, facts.
That's where I think, unfortunately, there's not really a winner in this backfield for fantasy purposes at the moment. Like, I feel like it could just be a muddled. If these guys are getting 10 to 12 touches apiece, they could be guys you just don't really want to play, honestly.
Yeah, it's so tough to predict. I do think, though, like 10 to 12 touches split up in a bad backfield is something that you don't want to touch. But I think like Jacksonville's kind of proven that they could pump out some fantasy points from the running backs, though. Because these guys can make big plays and sometimes are on the goal line, and they have a ceiling of having a good weekly offense from week to week, and that's not something we thought we had from New York coming into the year. But Mr. Tyrone Tracy, who's our RB23. Don't know what the deal with Devin Singletary's injury is yet. He's dealing with the groin injury, which could be a multi-week absence. If he's gone again, Tyrone Tracy against his Cincinnati front seven.
He's the man.
Yeah, I mean, we like Tracy a lot during the dynasty season. He is like this, all-encompassing back that could do a lot. I want to see him get more involved in the passing game, obviously, because he only had
wide receiver.
Correct, 4 years of wide receiver. Gatorade National Player of the Year in high school as a wide receiver, which is.
And then he's playing running back in PPR leagues too. Like he didn't even get any receptions this.
That's what I'm saying.
The other thing was part of the play or the enticing part of playing him this last week was, the Giants are going to be trailing, so there should be a lot of dump-off work. And they win the football game.
Turns out Tyrone just went Derrick Henry on these motherfuckers.
Right.
Eric Gray fumbled, and now he probably fumbled away his spot on the depth chart to Tyrone Tracy. This is another one that feels a little bit like, probably not to the level of, but Chase Brown-ish energy, where if Devin Singletary's out again, I would be
moving him up,
hella comfortable starting Tracy as my RB2.
Dude, if he's out, Tyrone Tracy and in that same game, you could be looking at two top 12, 15 backs.
Week 6, and we're like Chase Brown, Tyrone Tracy, the best running back duo in the league.
Let's go.
And you could pick both of them up off your waiver wire, most likely. Or you could have.
What a joke fantasy football is.
I
All right,
hate
so we
this
got
sport.
Rashad White at 25, Tank Bigsby at 26, Bucky at 27, Javonte at 28, Joe Mixon. Andrew, looks like you're still holding out hope for the boy. Listen, these rankings are very like injury agnostic right now. We film these on Wednesday morning, so we only have practice reports from Tuesday, and obviously there will be a lot of injury updates as the week goes forward. So are you more confident this week that Mixon plays?
Has to be.
I feel like every week that goes by, I should feel more confident about Joe Mixon. And look,
because it was a minor injury, right?
It was a minor injury, and the funny thing too is that Houston actually, it was day to day, then it was week to week, then it was day to day again, but then it was week to week again, and now we're back to day to day. That's the latest is day to day.
I actually saw the latest was week to week, but
really.
Yeah, I was just looking.
Maybe it switched again. And here's the thing: it's a nasty injury. Obviously, the high ankle for the running back is much harder to recover from. Yeah. I don't know, man. If he plays, obviously it's because he feels comfortable enough with his with his health that he's going to be able to play. I think he should be a fine play at that point. I don't really know what to do with him
one of my concerns right now, a little bit with Joe Mixon, if you're an owner of him long term, like you drafted well if you drafted him, right? Like you should have had a great running back.
Yeah, it looked great for 1 week.
I'm a little bit concerned now that in his absence, these 3 weeks, Dare Ngumbawale, I feel like has looked great as a pass catching back and has added a little bit of explosion to the point where like it doesn't make sense to have Mixon in on 90% of the snaps anymore. Yeah. I think when Mixon returns, there's a chance, don't know if it's a certainty, but I think there's a chance that Dare takes a relatively large third down role in this offense, which is, shitty if you're a Mixon owner, obviously. You could still have monster games on the ground, but from what I've watched, like if you watch any Houston in the last 3 weeks, it's like Akers looks absolutely dusty. Dare looks explosive, and he looks like a good player.
Coming into the year, the reason why I liked Joe Mixon a lot really was not even that I felt like he was going to get a ton of work in the air. It was that he should have so many touchdown opportunities in this good Houston offense that he should score double digit. Yeah. And, I mean, that said, obviously, the ranking this is a guy who we have no idea what's going to happen this week. So I have him at 18. Probably shouldn't have him at 18. Maybe that's me just hoping that I can play him in our idiot league mates, but I digress.
I feel that.
Well, I mean, the thing about it for me, at least,
I need to play him.
I got Zach Moss as my RB8 this week.
Fair.
When I look at Mixon, though, so if the guy right now, they're saying and reporting that he may be available this week, his status is up in the air. So if we're saying we're not even sure if he can play. Now let's imagine the world and just insert ourselves into the world where he is playing. If he couldn't play last week and he's not certain to play this week, like when he's actually available to be on the field, is he all of a sudden just back to Joe Mixon in week 2?
Yeah.
I have a hard time buying that that's actually the thing. And the reason I say that's important is you just mentioned Cam Akers, which there was a couple runs I think Akers has looked explosive on, but honestly, if you look at his whole body of work, he has looked putrid, right?
Horrible.
If Mixon's not at 100%, what's keeping him from being realistically slightly better than that?
Yeah.
Like, that's where I worry that when he's on the field, he's actually going to be someone that's moving and shifty and someone that you really want to have as a, top 20 running back. I'm much more of the mindset I want to see it first.
I guess one thing I would say is, like, if the reports are true that he hasn't suffered a setback, maybe it's a good thing that they are just holding him out. I mean, listen, people miss 3 to 4 weeks with high ankle sprains.
Right.
Like, it happens.
Yeah.
So maybe it was more severe. Maybe them holding him out does kind of signal a good thing for him, and that, like, maybe he comes back at full strength. But I don't know if we're getting real fucking reports out of
So
Houston
this
here.
is the latest report that I'm reading. It's coming from Coach D'Amico Ryans. He relayed Monday that Texans don't know whether Mixon will be able to return to Sunday's game at New England. For Joe and his injury, we will still evaluate this as a week-to-week basis.
That's what I just read, too.
He's been definitely improving week to week, but we'll know more on Wednesday when we resume practice.
Yeah, don't sound great.
And the reality is that was the report that I read most recently. And I look at Brown's different position. David Njoku comes back this week. I don't even know if you can really compare it, but I just looked at a guy that didn't look like he was moving like he used to.
Well, he got re-hurt, too. That sucks for David.
Honestly, that's the least of our problems in Cleveland.
David Njoku ain't moving. Then
You got an
for the
injury
whole
at the
Cleveland
quarterback
Browns
position right now
organization.
without,
But the whole idea there is I'm of the mindset I need to see Joe Mixon actually on the field and looking right. And if that's the case, then I think I'm willing to have conversations with him going back to the old tier.
That's kind of fair because, like, I'm kind of thinking the same way with, like, Cooper Kupp. Like, obviously it's not the receiver conversation to have right now, but, like, he's got a bye coming up, and then they're like, he'll be back week 7. I'm kind of like, if he's active, I'm going to play him, but I'm also like, I'll believe it when I fucking see it.
I feel that. Also, at the same time, though, like, I look at the running back position. I'm like, they tell me that Joe Mixon is healthy and he's going to be in this game. I'm just debating between him and ETN. Like, just give me Joe Mixon, bro.
Yeah,
and that's why I have him at 18. Like, ETN's 20. Like, there's a real chance. I think, obviously, like, we know the ceiling of a guy like Joe Mixon is higher than 18 or 42, wherever we have him ranked. But I think, that was me trying to temper expectations of, like, I'll put him at 18 if he plays.
And I think the last thing I'll say is that if they told us, hey, he's probably going to miss 3 to 4 weeks, but he'll be ready to go when he comes back, all right, I might believe it. Right now, all I have to go off of is that they keep telling me he's supposed to be back and he's not ready to go.
Yeah,
that's not a good thing either.
Yeah. So let's move on to another backfield dealing with a high ankle sprain right now, and that is the Indianapolis Colts. They're playing at Tennessee. We've got Trey Sermon as a collective 31 right now. Now, Sermon had a good week last week, fantasy point wise. He kind of did like his Breece Hall impression, to be honest with you. He ended up getting a goal line score. He caught 6 passes kind of out of nowhere. I think up to this point in his career, if I remember correctly, he's had 7 receptions through 3 or 4 years.
Shout out Joe Flacco.
Shout out to Joe Flacco, for real. So that begs the question. There's a lot of moving parts here.
A lot.
I'm going to say, I think we could say with 70% confidence, maybe 80%, that JT's probably not going to play this week.
Yep.
Yes.
Now, Trey Sermon is the guy that's getting a lot of snaps. Tyler Goodson did play a decent portion of the snaps. I do think he's a better pass catcher and probably better suited for that role. But the thing with Joe Flacco is, like, he's looking to check down no matter what down it is.
Yep.
First down, second down. You don't need to play the third down role in order to get receptions in that offense. Now, is Joe Flacco playing this week, or is Anthony Richardson? That becomes a little bit of an issue. But if A-Rich is under center, do they try to have the offense go through the running backs a little bit more? Talk to me about, like, how y'all feeling about Trey Sermon this week, because he feels, if I had to, like, put him into a tier right now, he's definitely more of like a flex, a questionable flex play in my mind than he is like the rock solid RB2.
That's where I have him. Probably feels a little egregiously low, but honestly, from what I saw last week, it didn't look great. Other than all those pass catching like opportunities he got. My thing with him at this ranking is that if you told me that Flacco is for sure the starter, I will push him up just because there's going to be more locked in, probably checkdowns. My 38 is that if it's him and A-Rich, what I saw from him on the ground looked very cone-like.
Yeah,
and
he was a little coney for
unfortunately
sure.
What I wasn't hoping that, just being in that Indianapolis offense and a good offensive line, that I'm going to see better things from him. I have him at 38 because I don't know that it's going to be Flacco again. If it's Flacco, I'll probably move him up a decent amount. My other concern is 6 touches in the receiving game going to be likely, or is it maybe he only gets 3 and now Goodson gets another 3?
Yeah, that felt like very fluky. I could literally see if A-Rich is playing, Sermon will probably have 1 catch. Like his line on Underdog will probably be either 0.5 receptions, 1.5 at max with a spicy chili going higher.
So if it's A-Rich, he will be coming down my rankings pretty significantly.
Okay.
I'm going with the impression of right now they haven't announced that A-Rich is back, so I'm going to operate as if Joe Flacco is starting this week. If he's starting this week, I think he's more of like this low-end RB2 flex type of play, just based off of what we saw last week. I know that the matchup against Tennessee is a little bit tougher. They're right now 11th against the running back position, so pretty tough for the most part, top third of the league.
Yeah.
I think right now, with Flacco under center, if that is actually what happens, there's a chance that, Trey Sermon has a couple touchdown opportunities here used on the goal line. He does profile as the better guy there, and I think that alone gives him, enough appeal that I'd be comfortable throwing him in as that flex or the RB2 in a pinch, in a desperation type of play, but definitely if it's A-Rich, it's going to come down quite a bit.
Okay, let's move down to a dude that I think, will be playing this week against me. Me and Adam actually play against each other in your Idiot League mates this week. Huge.
Sure do.
Every week is a huge matchup against everybody. Doesn't matter, but this is even bigger.
Bars.
All right, and we've got probably the last guy we'll talk about right now before we get to the deep cuts portion, but Alexander Mattison at 30. Now, Zamir White missed last game. Mattison was supposed to be, the workhorse, whatever. Didn't really have a great game.
It's a bad matchup too, though.
Bad matchup, but it doesn't get much better.
This one only could be worse.
Playing against Pittsburgh, Amir Abdullah ended up having like a really solid, efficient game there. So with Mattison,
Wasn't Abdullah's only because he had that like big run? Didn't he have like a 40-something yard run?
Yeah, he went 5 for 50 on the ground and
And one
scored
of them
a
was
touchdown.
like 40-something yards.
Yeah, so like that being said, though, I think they trust Amir Abdullah. They've used him in like a third down role, and Mattison like was playing that role, and now he's like in the Zamir White role.
That's what I was just going to say is his role without Zamir White on the field has shifted from what we saw last week.
Talking about cones, maybe it's just Antonio Pierce is a cone.
Probably. Anytime a fucking franchise tries to like take what happened the last 4 weeks with a coach and then rehire him, it never works.
Did you see that?
This is what's going to happen with the Jets.
Mid-season, week 6, right now, going to play Pittsburgh, he's opening a quarterback competition this week.
Go. I mean, honestly, I don't really blame him.
Yeah, but
Minshew was terrible.
both of these guys don't need full reps to be prepared for
That's
Pittsburgh.
fair.
For
Yeah,
sure.
I mean, Minshew's terrible, but realistically, Aiden O'Connell's worse. I promise you.
I-
You got Cone in your name, there's no escaping it.
Fair. I feel the same way. I'm like, if they want upside, it's not going Aiden O'Connell. However, I guess he's probably feeling like he's pulling at straws to get anything out of this offense.
Agreed. It's a tough spot to be in right now. They have nothing on the run game going, nothing on the pass game going. You have your one like premier weapon that doesn't want to play for you anymore. Devontae's, gone from LV. So
all that to say, I feel absolutely awful about Madison in this matchup. To me, he's one of the clear running back ones for the team, but I still don't have him as a top 34 or top 32 running back. I have him at 34 because I feel like he's going to get the work. Frankly, touchdown upside versus Pittsburgh, I don't feel good about in general. I don't feel good about him getting a ton of pass work if Abdullah's playing the same role too.
Yeah, I actually weirdly feel like he could have a decent game. Like I think he'll end up getting you like 9 to 11 PPR points.
Is Zamir White playing for this week in that scenario, or how?
No, definitely
Okay.
not.
Okay.
Do you feel better if Zamir White plays? Not really, obviously, but like I actually don't know what Zamir White's status is. I kind of just assume they're like, we don't need you right now, so just like rest up until you're.
Well, it sounded like the groin injury was somewhat serious. Like
Yeah.
he should miss a couple.
He's very likely to miss this week.
So Madison, I think again, like they'll try to put him into a 15 plus touch role. Again, it'll probably be like 3.4 yards per carry kind of thing. But if he ends up catching 3 dump offs, if he ends up getting a lucky carry on the goal line, I think he'll be okay.
Maybe not a huge conversation to have here, but why, if they're grasping at straws, why don't we see what we got in Dylan Luabe?
That feels like I don't know. He must not have like a strong impression.
I honestly
I feel
believe
like he's a good pass catcher.
Yeah,
and
but
he
I
can
feel like a
bruise.
guy like Dylan Luabe is, if you look at it, he's a guy that he does profile to be a pass catching back, but I have a feeling coming out of New Hampshire, this guy has a problem with pass protection. So it's like, how do I find snaps in the NFL?
Is that how you say his last name? Does anyone know?
Wabe. Yeah.
Wabe?
Yeah.
Okay.
Wabe is how I've always said it, but I have no idea that.
I've been like saying it. I probably used 5 different pronunciations over like the course of the last 6
So the
months.
way that I heard it
lobby
from the announcers at New Hampshire was Luabe.
Okay. Lobstein.
Yeah.
Lobstein it is.
Luby.
Lubinator. Talking about lube. Let's lube up the bottom of your roster here with some deep cuts. Guys ranked outside of the top 40 as per, not these rankings, but ECR, expert consensus rankings this week that maybe can give you a little bit of upside, maybe can tap into some PPR potential for you. Who you got, Mr. Andy?
Yeah, we talked about him briefly, but this is assuming that Joe Mixon is not playing. If he's not playing, I think Dare Ogunbowale is a great play. Right now, he is outside pretty far. You can probably pick him up off of waivers most likely. And over the last couple of weeks, he has had 13.4 fantasy points and 11.7 fantasy points. And last week, he took more snaps and more touches than Cam Akers. I think you said it, Nick. You know, he's being used in early down situations, third down situations, on the goal line as a receiver. And there is a chance, too, with Nico Collins out of this lineup most likely here this week, they do lean on maybe just getting a couple extra checkdowns to Dare Ogunbowale, making him a decent PPR play for you this week.
For mine, I have Austin Eckler. He's just inside the criteria here. When I was looking at the rankings, guys, we're talking about like Alexander Mattison here.
He's
in the
RB40? That's fucking insane.
I don't know why he's that low, but like when we're talking about the guys in the 30s, and I'm really having a hard time having any type of confidence at this point. When we get down this low, there's nobody that's getting a lot of work, that's getting a lot of like opportunity, that's in an inspiring situation personally. The one thing about Eckler, while though the touches have been kind of scarce, he's been, at least last week when I watched him versus Cleveland, was hyper efficient. He does not look to be the guy of last season where he was running in mud. He's actually been really efficient with the touches he's getting. So even though he's only getting 8, Brian Robinson's still a little banged up. Obviously, there's like 3 guys getting touches there. But if I'm playing someone outside the top 40, there's not someone that I feel overly inspired by. Austin Eckler would be my guy.
I'm surprised he's not. Am I missing him? He's not in your guys' top 40 anywhere?
No.
Yeah, he hasn't scored. He's scored double-digit fantasy points in every single game he's played. Like, I think he's a legitimate, strong flex option. I would play him like almost weekly.
You aren't nervous about this Baltimore defense this week?
Dude, I don't think
so
like
tough.
Eckler. They are so tough, but I also think like Eckler's not a dude that is worried about like running in between the tackles. Like, he doesn't get his points that way.
Well, I think they're even good in the air, like against.
Sure.
I don't know. I think that's the only reason why. I think I had Eckler like very fringe.
I believe he's next for me, right outside. Like, so I have Tyler Algier because they're playing Carolina, and that defense is pretty bad. I think I believe I have Austin Eckler next, but I might even need to move Austin Eckler up. But he's a guy that I feel pretty good at getting to this point. In
and maybe
rankings.
I'm overly high, but I think he's been really consistent. I would have him damn near up by like Javonte Williams. I think.
Really,
like
the one thing about the only reason I don't know if I guess when you start getting to
guess what the over under of the Washington Baltimore game is?
That's a good
It is
question.
52.
I was going to guess it was higher
Great
because
guess,
of the quarterbacks. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's what I mean. Like, this is, I know that like Baltimore has a good defense for the most part, but like they also just let up like 40 points.
The one thing, the reason I would have a prop, like when I have a hard time in this range for him is right now he has been very efficient, but also his touches have been like 8, 8, 6 the last 3 weeks. So it's like you got to have that efficiency, otherwise the touches don't mean enough.
Yeah, I almost think like this is one instance where like Cliff's offense actually works in Eckler's favor. Like the reason it's so efficient is because it's like he's getting so many screen passes and stuff like that. Yeah. That to me is predictable week over week. Where it's like if he was doing what like Dobbins was doing early in the year, where it's like, oh, Eckler keeps breaking off like 30-yard runs on ISOs up the middle, I'll be like, probably not going to happen against Baltimore. But because like so much of the offense is relying around these short line of scrimmage passes, that's where Eckler succeeds. So these are half PPR rankings, but in full PPR, he would, no questions asked, I'd have him as a flex in my lineup.
That's agreed. Full PPR, I'd have him up higher too.
And you're right. Last week, 8 opportunities, not even just carries, but opportunities. 8 of them was his second highest of the year.
So that's
big time.
That's tough.
Those are big
Love to
numbers.
see those 8 touches, baby.
And that's with Brian Robinson missing like a lot of snaps. I think the last couple of weeks he did not play. He played sparingly versus the Browns, although he had 2 touchdowns.
Yeah,
That's
Eckler
how
saw
bad we are.
49% of those snaps last week, so
It's pretty good.
There you go. All right. And there you have it for the running back rankings for week 6. We will put the wide receiver version of this same video right here on the screen if you want to go watch that afterwards. That always goes live a few hours after the running back rankings do every single Wednesday. So make sure you are subscribed to get them videos to your face holes, all right? And again, if you want the rankings at any time, just head over to bdge.co. Become a Big Dog member. Cheapest way to do it, Underdog Fantasy. Deposit $10 on there with the code BDGE, and you'll get access to the membership for free for the rest of the year. We'll see you when we sees you.
Smoochies.